Next performer is Pete Waltershaw.
Thank you, Rod. It's really an honor and a pleasure to be here tonight. If you're like, I'm like most magicians, I guess. We've got drawers full of lecture notes and books on the shelf that we don't ever look at. But I like going to the public library and looking at things. The thing I don't like about the public library is in the fact that, well, they always have magic under puzzles and games in the Dewey Decimal System. And I never thought magic should be in good puzzles and games. It should be under the theater arts. But that's just my own little gripe. But I have something here that I can't decide whether this is a puzzle or whether it's a trick. I thought maybe you could decide here for me. I brought with me tonight some hole cards. You've heard of gamblers that have hole cards. Well, I have hole cards too. See, this is a hole card. They call it a hole card because it has a hole. Now, the second card is also a hole card because it's whole, complete, all one piece. See, that's why we call it a whole card. See, the third card is like the second card. It's whole, all one piece. The fourth card is like the first. It has a hole, so we call it a whole card. So you see this effect deals with two whole cards and two whole cards. You follow? See, the back of each whole card is colored red. So if you put a whole card against a whole card, it looks like a spot card. But you see, it's not a spot card, it's a whole card showing through the hole. And since there's two whole cards and two whole cards, you get the impression of two spot cards, see? But they're not spot cards, they're a whole card showing through holes. Unless you give a snap and a tap like this, what you end up with is a spot card that doesn't rub off. Now the plot thickens, you see. Because that leaves us now with two whole cards and a whole card. Now this was a whole card, but we'll get back to that in a minute. So you take the whole card and the whole card like this, you give a few taps like this. You know what you end up with? A whole bunch of spots. Yeah, I know. Well, thank you. That's kind of silly, isn't it? So anyway, so now we're left with one whole card and a whole card. We won't use the whole card, use a corner of the whole card. To create the illusion of a spot card, see? I'll bring this across here like this, give it a rub like here. What looked like a spot card is now a whole card. This spot card over here is now, this whole card is now a spot card. But the spot's so big, it covers the whole card. I didn't think you'd buy that. So anyway, we're left with what you call a whole card. Now the way I've been talking, you can call this a whole card. You can call this a whole card with a hole. You can call it a whole card. Put this up against here like this. Give a snap and a tap, you've got a spot card with a hole. So now you've got a spot card with a hole. Here you have a spot card so big it covers the whole card. Here you have a whole bunch of spots, and here you have a single spot. And the reason this whole trick is so confusing is because everybody always watches the spots. Nobody ever pays any attention to, are you ready? The hole. That's my story, I'm singing to it. A lot of people ask me when I got started doing magic. Nowadays, more people ask me when I'm going to quit. But it had to do with my uncle. You know, my uncle was a strange fellow. He only knew one trick, and he could do this trick with a Ritz cracker. See, he was a strange fella. I remember he knew the exact month, day, and hour he was going to die. Well, the judge told him. See, Pour Up wasn't a good example for us kids. He sent him to the electric chair. We were there on the day of his execution. I was rapping on the glass. And I didn't think he ever cared much for me. I was about this high. But I realized I was his favorite nephew because when the warden strapped him in and asked him if he had any last words, he said, yes, I want Pete to come sit on my lap. And that was really touching. So to this very day, in honor of his memory, on the anniversary of his death, I put a wreath on the fuse box. But he used to do this little trick with the Ritz cracker, and it's funny, you know. I remember I was 5 years old, and it was Christmas Eve, and I was sitting in the living room in front of this great big roaring fire. And the reason I remember it so well, because we didn't have a fireplace. But he'd come into the room, and he had this cracker in his hand, and he'd go round and around and around she goes. What happens next, nobody knows. He'd reach up into the air, he'd grab a little woofoo dust, he called it, and he'd sprinkle it over his hand like this. He'd open his hand and the cracker was gone. And at 5 years old, that's the most amazing trick I'd ever seen in my life. He'd say, watch, stupid. Yeah, he always called me watch. Say, around and around and around she goes. What happens next, nobody knows. He'd reach up in the air and he'd grab that little woofle dust and he'd sprinkle it all over his hand like that. And then he'd show the cracker was gone. And I could never really figure that out. No need for applause. Just a crummy trick. But anyway, I learned a lot from that. As an adult, I came to appreciate that trick. I read a lot about magic. I have for years and years. And back at the turn of the century, there was about all the stage shows featured a section where they called Mysteries of the Orient. A lot of times they'd have the magicians come out in Chinese garb, and they would perform mysteries of the Far East because it was very mystical to people back in those days. And one of the effects that survived those years has been the Chinese rice bowls. And I'd like to perform for you tonight my own classic version of the Chinese rice bowls. Music, maestro, please. The Chinese rice bowls.
I'm sexy and I know it.